So this large boneless ribeye has been aging in the refrigerator for about a week and a half now. And you can see it's gotten very crusty and brown on the outside. The color is very different from this fresh one, which I just took out of the cryo a minute or two ago. It hasn't really lost that much weight through evaporation, but it's got a very thick crust on it, which we're going to have to trim off. And it's really not too difficult, but I want to show you the difference of what the meat looks like, even on the inside, the aged versus the unaged. So first thing we're going to do is just trim off the end. So, I don't know if you can see that, but the color here is a very, very deep sort of rosy red color, and that's because of the aging. If we were to cut the same piece off the fresh one, you're going to see the inside color is a bit different. So let's do that. Let's just cut a nice steak while we're at it. I don't know if you can see the difference, but the color for the aged one is considerably darker than the fresh one straight out of the cryo. They're both going to be delicious, but the flavor will be a little different. This one will definitely be beefier, have a more intense flavor, and the texture will also be more solid while still being very, very juicy. You can see, as we've talked about before, that it's still very well marbled because these are choice. We would never buy Select because they don't taste very good. You can get Prime at Costco these days. You don't really need to if you're dry aging it yourself. You can certainly if you want to splurge. But you can see the difference in color here. So once you have got your dry aged beef, you can do a lot with it. You want to trim off this leathery end, which is not really very edible. Smells just fine. It smells just like a steak. But this leathery stuff you save for soup. You wouldn't want to throw this away. You can make soup stock out of this, and then my dogs love me, and I think you know why. So that goes there. Let's cut off a steak and trim it up. What I do when I have these is I actually just start working my way down from one end to the other. This end is going to stay crusty. You wouldn't want to keep trimming it off and trimming it off and trimming it off because you're going to lose a lot that way. So just start at one end. Let's cut a nice steak of about 1.5 inches thick. And that's just my guess. This is going to be a beautiful ribeye steak. There we go. So you've got this crust. You could cook it with the crust on. It's a little sort of funky. So we're going to take it off, and as you can see, the crust is mostly covering this fat cap, which you might want to take off anyway. So with the trimming that you're going to do, you're not really losing very much. So we'll just trim this up, just enough to take off the brown parts. And you save all of this for your stock pot. And then you fish it out of the stock pot when it's done and given up most of its flavor. I don't want to take that off. And give it to the dogs. Now you can see I'm not the most expert butcher in the world. Now there's this little tail right here, which typically is mostly fat, and what meat is in there is not fantastic. So that can go in the stock pot too. There's a little bit of meat that you might be giving up right here. But to be honest with you, it's not the greatest part in the world. So I'm going to follow this fat line right here and trim it off. So you have all these lovely scraps, which you're going to use for beef stock. And you have a pretty nicely trimmed, it's not perfect actually, could use a little more, ribeye steak. Now, that's not the only thing you're going to do with this wonderfully aged rib. You are also going to make a fantastic prime rib holiday roast. So let's take off, 6 or 8 inches. And obviously you could roast the entire remaining piece of meat if you wanted to. So we've got about a 6 to 8 inch boneless ribeye here. Makes a perfect prime rib. Look at that. That is, well, I'm just having fun looking at that. Okay, and again, same way, you're going to trim this brown, crusty fat cap off. Now you'll notice I am trimming towards myself. This is not recommended because the knife will slip and I will cut off my entire left arm. But if I did, boy, my views would go up, wouldn't they? Okay. And underneath, it's perfectly white, beautiful, beautiful stuff. Okay, there's still some that didn't quite come off. You could, if you wanted to be more careful, cut away from yourself. It's a little ungainly, but it is certainly safer. And there's nothing that says you have to use an enormous knife like this. You could use a little boning knife, which many people do. And if you feel safer, that's just fine. Beautiful, right? You can trim a little more fat off if you want. I think the whole point of a roast like this is to have a nice amount of fat, but that's your choice. Okay, now we'll go the other way. You don't want to take too much of this outer cap off because this is the most tender part. It used to be called the Old London broil, but they don't do this anymore for that. It's too expensive. But it is the tastiest, most well-marbled, right along here, piece of the prime rib. So I'm not too eager to take off a lot of that. I'm taking off just the leathery, hard, dried out portions that have resulted from our aging. Just enough. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that these things have been boned by machine. So right here, there's gouges where the ribs used to be. Those are not so easy to take off. So all you can do is sort of shave off this outside layer, which is dried up. And then go in here gently and take out the dry portions. And actually this stayed very nice and moist. Well, you're going to take this whole tail off anyway. Again, now, we talked about this with the steak. You could roast it with this piece on it, but this meat is not fantastic and it's mostly fat, and you can see it goes all the way through and you've got this nice fat line, so I'm going to take this whole tail piece off. Okay. Yes, there's meat on it. It's not a great loss. So now I have a very nicely trimmed, well, adequately trimmed rib eye roast for the holidays. Amazing how small it got, isn't it? But this is perfectly ready to go ahead and roast, and we'll show you that in the next video.